Editorial or copyist errors could easily creep into the text, and the use of the Hebrew Bible and the New Covenant Scriptures is completely in line with the Jewish interpretive methods of the day, with this one caveat. In many ways, the use of the Tanakh in the New Testament is more restrained, contextual, and sober than its use in the rabbinic writings. I wrote a paper some years ago, delivered it at a Messianic conference many years back, and then we have made it available online on our Real Messiah website. It will come out as the appendix to Volume 5. It's an article called Unequal Weights and Measures, where I basically critique the methodology of the anti-missionaries who will attack the New Covenant writings with one weight, one measure, and if you use that same weight or measure on the Hebrew Bible, if the New Covenant writings would be thrown out in a day, the Hebrew Bible would be thrown out in an hour. And if you use that same standard of criticism on the Talmud, it would be thrown out in a minute. And I show this in many different ways. One rabbi, a very sincere anti-missionary Hasidic Jew, he wrote a response claiming that it was right to use different weights and measures because you were dealing with Judaism versus Christianity. And that the burden of proof somehow relied on, quote, Christianity, which is later, and there are two different systems and two different methods. I mean, for that to be the answer to justify the use of unequal weights and measures was quite amusing to me, despite the sincerity of this rabbi. The fact is, if you want to start searching the manuscripts, say, oh, well, there are contradictions in some of the manuscripts. Well, find the Masoretic manuscripts, the thousands of Masoretic manuscripts. There are major volumes, famous volumes to Old Testament scholars, volumes, for example, of Kennicott DeRossi, that these big fat things that just list variations in the Masoretic manuscripts. You want to pick on the manuscripts of the New Covenant writings, then pick on the Masoretic manuscripts, and then once you get back to the manuscripts of Dead Sea Scrolls, and etc., you say, well, these New Covenant manuscripts are very reliable. And plus, there's methodology, scientific ways of evaluating the text, and you can really determine, in almost all the cases, what the most accurate and best readings are. Well, the New Testament is self-contradictory. These resurrection accounts, you can't put them together, and these other accounts, well, yeah, if you look at them critically, you'll say they're self-contradictory. But scholars have said the same thing with the opening chapters of Genesis, that the creation account of Genesis 1 contradicts the creation account in Genesis 2. One of the explanations where you seem to have some texts within the Pentateuch that are self-contradictory, or if this happened here and this happened after, the order doesn't seem to work. So there's a rabbinic dictum that says, Ein mukdam umuchar. There's no early or later in the Torah. In other words, you don't know that just because this event is recorded here and this event is recorded later, that they actually happen in that historical significance. So you can just switch them around so they'll work better. I mean, look, the giving of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20 and the giving of the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy 5 uses some different words. And one, Zachor, remember the Sabbath. The other, Shamor, observe the Sabbath. And how is that explained by the later rabbis, that God said Zachor and Shamor in one word? And one tells you one, the other tells you the other. If that's how you are going to resolve difficulties, then come to the New Covenant writings and resolve them the same way. In point of fact, there are more apparent contradictions, more historical issues in the Hebrew Scriptures than in the New Covenant writings. If by simple force of the fact that the Tanakh is bigger and covers a wider period of time. Come on, the most important event in biblical history, in terms of the ancient history of Israel, is the Exodus from Egypt. This was the turning point. This is where God reveals himself as the one true God to the nation. And the other writers constantly point back to the Exodus. And yet there is no supporting archaeological evidence for the Exodus account as recorded in Scripture. You say, well, I guess we just don't have the archaeological evidence that we need, but we know the account is true if you believe the Scriptures. Otherwise, you keep digging, searching, asking questions. So the issue of alleged historical errors in the New Testament, there are various works we reference in the study guide, encyclopedias of Bible difficulties that treat, from their viewpoint, Old Testament issues, New Testament issues, all the same, because to followers of Jesus, this is the one Bible. But there's one account that's very well known, and it's an edifying, interesting account. In some of the early generations of major skeptical New Testament scholarship, there was a German professor, F.C. Bauer, at Tübingen, Germany, very influential in terms of his skepticism of the reliability of the New Testament documents. Someone that bought into his school of thought was William Ramsey. William Ramsey, later Sir William Ramsey, decided to go through the various locations in Asia Minor, in the biblical world, and to trace out, okay, Paul's journeys here, and cities that are referenced, and places that are spoken of in Luke and Acts, and so on and so forth, basically to prove the unreliability of the New Testament documents. He was going to go to these places, especially places in the life of Paul, and okay, Luke says this happened here, okay, we know it didn't really happen. And then, he says, there's this account with this person, we know it really didn't happen. Well, as a result of his studies, he became a committed follower of Jesus and a believer in the truthfulness of the New Testament. He completely reversed his position. Look, that's not easy to do when you proceed from a skeptical viewpoint, and when coming to the opposite conclusion is going to rock your whole world. And the works of Sir William Ramsey are still widely used today, even though it's decades and decades and decades and decades ago that he did his research. So there are good books like Craig Blomberg's Historical Reliability of the Gospels, dealing with that issue, and the F.F. Bruce book I mentioned, and then various encyclopedias of Bible difficulties. If you will give the biblical text the benefit of a doubt. In other words, I could see these testimonies as contradictory, or I could see these as harmonious, just different viewpoints. The standard illustration that's used is, here's a policeman standing at the scene of an accident, and he's talking to 4 eyewitnesses. One was in the car behind, one was on the street corner over here, one was in the restaurant looking out through the window, one was a passenger in the car that got hit, and he's, okay, what happened? All 4 are going to tell the same story differently. And in fact, if they all told it the exact same way, to the detail, you think it's contrived. They're making it up. And then what you do is you put the accounts together, if you have any understanding of how to do this, an experienced policeman would, and then you get the overall picture that comes from the different witnesses. So you read Kings, you read Chronicles, you get different witnesses with different perspectives, seeking to emphasize different points. That's why we have 4 different Gospels, to repeat certain things so that they're drilled home and we get it, and then to present it in different angles for different audiences and through different lenses, all telling the same story. And what you'll normally find is a clear internal harmony. Again, I'm not going to go through details because those have been gone through many, many times. If you want to be skeptical, you can be skeptical. I just urge you to be consistent in your skepticism. If you're a traditional Jew and you want to attack the New Covenant writings mercilessly, just attack the Tanakh the same way, or attack the Talmud the